Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on December 19th. For those who don't already know, Cathedra means learning in Creek. In that respect, today we'll be learning about the updates to federal regulations for tribes, Uniform Guidance Part 1 from Vince Franco. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the NLC. We're also thrilled that you could join us today. Please follow along as I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Before we get started, I want to familiarize you with some of the features available and how the environment works. So if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see an icon of either a person with their hand raised or just a hand. Know that with that icon, you can either raise your hand, you could agree, disagree, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to this graphic here. To the bottom left, you'll see a box that says Files. Here you'll find any handouts or appendix items included from today's presentation. You'll also find a copy of the slides today that Vince has given us permission to share. So feel free to download a copy for yourself. Just click the item you want to download and then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save it onto your device. Once it's downloaded, it'll appear in your device's download section. The next box over is labeled Web Links. This is where you can find a link to today's survey, along with any other links that are going to appear throughout today's presentation. I also suggest that you follow the link to join our emailing list. We have a weekly newsletter that comes out once a week, so you can know about our exciting trainings. Finally, all the way over to the right, we have the chat box. This is how you'll communicate with the instructor and the NLC staff. So if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to interact by using the chat box. Just type your message and hit enter, or click the up arrow button icon to submit. We do encourage class participation, so feel free to write in those questions or any comments that you have. If you end up having some tech support issues, that could also be submitted there. But just know most of them can be solved by just exiting and then re-entering the meeting room. But let's all go ahead and try out the chat box together. Go ahead and type in what your name is, where you're joining us from, as well as your tribal affiliation, so we can know who all is in today's session. All right, folks, while you are sharing that, it's with great pleasure that I introduce today's webinar instructor, Vince Franco. And Vince, I'll let you take over now.
Very good. Thank you, Brooke. Thank you for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And thank you, everyone who's putting in information in the chat box. It helps us, as Brooke said, to get an idea where everyone is coming from, not so much geographically, but also need to know a little bit about your background and how familiar you are with the federal regulations. We're going to get right into this, and I want everyone to know that what we're going to be doing now is looking at the uniform guidance today and tomorrow, as Brooke had alluded to. The uniform guidance, which is also known as the 2 CFR Part 200, also has you might also recognize it by the name of the Super Circular. It's been around since 2014. There have been several generations of changes. The important thing that I want to get across to everyone is for everyone to keep in mind that the uniform guidance that we're going to be looking at over today and tomorrow and doing some deep dives into it to try to analyze it, it was really written for any entity out there in the greater community that would be eligible for federal funding. So to put it in different words, if you're an entity that's eligible for federal funding, these regulations that we're going to be looking at would apply to you. And you can consider them to kind of be the default regulations. Agencies in particular sometimes have their own set of regulations on top that might be more restrictive than what we're going to be looking at in the uniform guidance. I know HUD has its own set of regulations for housing with the Indian Housing Block Grant and the ICDBG and all those kind of grants related to housing. But the interesting about this uniform guidance is it applies to any entity, as I said, that's eligible. So that includes Indian tribes, that includes nonprofits, that includes tribal nonprofits. It also could include institutions of higher education, your colleges and universities, including tribal universities and colleges. It could include nonprofits. It could include medical facilities, hospitals in particular. It could apply also to churches and institutions of faith. It also could apply, what else am I missing? It could apply to just any of state governments. So, when we get into this, we want to keep in mind what I'm going to be doing is fine tuning the program to make sure that what we're looking at applies to tribes and tribal entities, tribal organizations, including nonprofits like TDHEs and things like that. So I'll be going through it. If you are a grant manager or new to the position or thinking about becoming a grant manager, then you really need to get a good understanding of the uniform guidance, the 2 CFR Part 200, because those regulations are going to pertain to you in many ways, many shapes, many forms, and you're going to have internal controls and policies and procedures in your organization, regardless of what you are, to be able to meet the letter of the law, so to speak. So you want to make sure that you understand, and that's what we're going to do over today and tomorrow. Do our best to do some deep diving here so that you basically understand how to navigate through the uniform guidance, how to identify certain citations in it, how to do a search, how to look for different things that might pertain to sealed bids or to procurement in general, or to equipment or supplies or anything like that. Know how to find things, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm not trying to be facetious here, but knowing how to navigate, knowing how to find things, knowing how to interpret these regulations is worth its weight in gold. If you're at all thinking about receiving federal funds or looking into it, you also need to have a good understanding of how to navigate, how to identify, how to interpret, how to implement these regulations. And it can be tricky sometimes. And you'll see what I mean when we get into it. Some of these regulations are vague. Some of them are very specific. Others are carryover from the Trump administration, and you'll see what I mean by that when we get into it. Others are even older than that. So, sorry, my screen just went black for a minute. Okay, here, we're back. So I want you to understand this is important to be able to navigate, interpret, identify how to get through. You're going to see a lot of QR codes through this presentation. I like the QR codes for lots of reasons. In particular, as you can see on the right side of the screen there, top right and top bottom, that happens to be the QR code for the Native Learning Center in the top right, and below that for the Seminole Tribe of Florida. I love them. You're going to see them scattered throughout here, throughout this presentation today and tomorrow, because I like the fact that a good QR code will take you in real time to whatever the source is that you're trying to talk about or trying to research. So I tend to pepper them throughout the program and use them as additional way to get information. And I'll point them out to you as well. You can't miss them as we're going through the program. And again, as Brooke said, if you have any questions or concerns, put them in the chat box, and I will do my absolute best to try to answer them for you. And as she also mentioned, there's a lot of good links down below on the left, the files that are there, updates to the federal regulations. That's this presentation. Below that, number 2 is the uniform guidance, the current version of what we're going to be talking about. And that's what you're going to see in this presentation as well, the current version. And the reason I'm saying current version is because there are updates that are proposed. I don't know if you know this. Not even 60 days ago, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, who designs and puts out the uniform guidance, came about from the Biden administration with updates to the uniform guidance. Now, they're not in a final approval yet. They're out for comment, But what I've done is I've gone through that information and I've put into this presentation where there are proposed updates to the regulations so you can get an idea what the regulations are now and what they could be. And what I mean by could be is like January coming up, less than 30 days, February at the latest, we could see some or all of these proposed updates approved and implemented into the new revised uniform guidance. And then it's just a matter of time before all the agencies codify or, AKA adopt them and, and put their stamp on them. That takes just a short period of time before all the agencies are on the bandwagon. So I'll try to point these out as we go through the program. What we're going to try to do today is get through at least 1 and 2, all of subpart A and subpart B, all of subpart C, and we'll see how far we get with subpart D. And I'll explain each one of these different subparts of the uniform guidance to you to the best of my ability. There are 6 different subparts, 6 different sections of the uniform guidance that we need to be aware of, right? We're going to do A, B, C, and a little bit of D today, if not all of it. Then tomorrow we'll do subpart E and subpart F. So you're asking what those are. We're going to get A is definitions. You need to know what, or everyone basically needs to know what the federal government, what is their nomenclature? What is their word usage? How do they recognize different things? What do they mean by a supply? What do they mean by equipment? What do they mean by procurement? What do they mean by an audit or a single audit? That's what the definitions part means, and I'm going to go through that. Subpart B is referred to as general regulations. Now, probably 95% of subpart B applies to the federal agencies and not so much to us as recipients of federal funding. However, there are citations in B, subpart B, that you need to be aware of. It's the OMB, the federal government, telling the different federal agencies how to treat us, what to do, what to expect, what to look for, what is risk, all of those kind of things that trickle down to us as recipients of federal funding. So we need to understand what the agencies, what their marching orders are. And I'll tell you what, folks, the reins are getting tighter and tighter on these federal agencies. The federal government, the Biden administration, OMB is putting more and more restrictions on the federal agencies, and they are passing those restrictions on to us more and more in different areas. So we'll talk about B a little bit, subpart B, and then C and D, we start transitioning a little bit over into what we need to do as recipients. Subpart C is what's referred to as pre-federal award requirements. Some of the things, again, mostly on an agency level, but some of the things that we need to be aware of as recipients of federal funds, regardless of whether we're a tribe or a nonprofit or a hospital or a college or whatever we might be, institution of higher learning. Subpart D is where the bread and butter really starts to come down. D, E, and F are the parts that really pertain to us, and we'll try to scratch that surface a little bit towards the back end of this program, and definitely tomorrow with subpart E and subpart F. Subpart D is post-award requirements. You've been approved for the award, whatever the federal grant is, and now you've got to have internal controls in place that meet the guidelines that we're going to go over, meet or exceed. So at a minimum, you need to understand what those regulations are, let alone how they're going to change, right? So that's just getting going in subpart D. Subpart E gets into what's called cost principles. What's allowable, what's unallowable, what's allocable, what's reasonable. All of those definitions of cost and expenses, where you can spend your money, where you cannot spend your money, and some potential changes. This is where we're going to get into procurement and cost allowances, direct and indirect costs. That's all in subpart E. And then we'll close it out tomorrow with subpart F. The second half of tomorrow's program will be subpart F, which is audit requirements. We really need to know what the auditors are going to be looking for when they come and do what's called the single audit. Thresholds have changed. Their marching orders, the regulations that the auditors have to abide by, are being scrutinized and tightened up, and they are passing those tighter restrictions onto us. The magnitude of risk, that's a big issue in the federal government, risk, identity theft, things like that you read about every day. Those are being pushed down to the agencies and the auditors, and with more restrictions. So we'll talk about that, the back end of tomorrow's presentation on subpart F. So hold on, we got a lot of territory to cover here in these 6 subparts, a lot of navigation, a lot of identification, interpretation, and implementation of all of these different policies and procedures. Okay, part 1 and part 2, 3 and 4. What we're doing is we're combining, as you see on the bottom left here. Part 1 and part 2 are going to be combined. That is what I was just talking about. You're just looking at it from a different perspective. Highlights of subpart A and B, highlights of subpart D or C, and as much as D as we can get into. Then tomorrow, on the right side, E and F, and you can see some of the specifics there that we'll be talking about. All right, let's get into it. I'm going to keep an eye, my right eye, so to speak, on the chat box. Make sure you can see if you have any questions or concerns. We got 28 people in this session, so there might be some questions or concerns that come up. I will do my best, as long as it's not too specific to your tribe or entity. Sometimes, we get into the weeds sometimes, and I want to try to not do that. That might have to be, if the questions are too specific or intimate to the operation of a particular TDHE or tribe or nonprofit, we may have to reserve that for a separate after hours, so to speak, conversation, and not chew up all the time that we have here. We basically have 3 hours to cover 2 full days worth of material. So let's get going here. I want to take a poll to start with. There it is, should pop up on your screen there. How familiar are you, as a whole, how familiar are you with the federal regulations, the Uniform Guidance, ONB's Super Circular, 2 CFR Part 200? A, not aware at all, tell me more. B, I've heard about it, but don't know all the details. C, I know something about it, and maybe I can navigate through it, but I don't know all the details. And D, I'm an expert. If you answer D, we're putting you on the speaker, by the way. You can do some of the co-presentation. And I can see the results coming in already. Thank you, Brooke, for posting the results there. I can see that mostly we're falling into the B and C category. Heard a little bit about it one way or another. But more specifically, I know of these regulations and the requirements. You know of them, and hopefully what we'll do is go that. And this is what I thought: the bulk of people would fall into B and C. I've heard of it, but don't know all the details. But on the other hand, the C question or C answer there, I kind of know what they are, but I need to get, we need some clarification. So that's what we're going to do. Thank you, Brooke. We're going to go through and work our way through it. Let's start with some resources here and some visuals to kind of paint a picture of what we're dealing with here. Updates to federal grant regulations, 2 CFR Part 200, also known as the Uniform Guidance, or AKA Super Circular. You see the pyramid on the left. That's kind of what we're dealing with here. Most of the time at the top, we've got the legislation. If it's housing related, we've got NAHASDA. If it's Davis-Bacon for construction, we've got that legislation sitting at the top of the pyramid. And then underneath that, we've got the 2 CFR Part 200, the Uniform Guidance. And then just a little bit below that, you've got the agency requirements. And then below that, towards the bottom of the pyramid, you've got the agencies, notices and updates and some of the protocols that they have in place. And at the very bottom, not bottom per se, but holding up the whole pyramid, you've got your own internal tribal protocols. You've got your internal controls, which are represented in policies and procedures. You've got best practices that we'll try to talk a little bit about today, best practices. anecdotal information, you know, what's going on out there. And you've got training programs like this. And as I mentioned before, throughout this document where there are specific changes to regulations, you'll see that little bracket there, kind of on the bottom middle right of the funky orange color. Call that burnt orange. Little notice that there will be changes in there, and where there are, I'll try to explain them. That's why that is there, to show what is currently available and what is potentially to change. A couple more QR codes here for your references. I really like to use ecfr.gov as a site for looking for federal regulations. It's kind of the equivalent of the Federal Register, which is the government's go-to for updates to the federal regulations. But I like it because it's not laid out like the Federal Register, which looks like a microscopic newspaper. It's laid out more in a narrative format, so it's easier to read. It's the same information. It's ecfr.gov is the site. You can go there and look up any regulation. And over on the right is a QR code to what's called the Green Book. And the Green Book, if you haven't heard of that, is the federal government's reference document for internal controls for federal agencies. So if you want to know where federal internal controls came from, we all have to have internal controls if we receive federal funds. It's a requirement. We'll get into that. But the Green Book, it's rather large. You know, it's probably 100 pages, but it gives the federal government's background and justification for creating internal controls. So you can look at that resource as well. And one of the links, one of the files over on the left, I think it's number 3 on your far left underneath files, is this document. This is the one that I put together. This is not a federal release document. This is my interpretation of the 300 plus page update to the uniform guidance. Remember, it applies to a lot of different industries, not just tribal. So that's why I went through the document and pulled out the information that pertains to those of us that are recipients of federal funds that are tribal or tribal nonprofit related. Now, instead of 300 pages, you've got about 6 pages. So that link is there. I strongly suggest using it, but only look at it, if I may say, only use it after you've gone through this type of training, because you need a baseline to be able to look at what the changes are. If that makes sense. Some of the changes might not make any sense to you if you don't know what the current regulation is right now. And that's what we're going to try to do. Go through them. Questions so far? Okay. All right. Let's get into some of what's called, like, these are like the precursor requirements. We're not even into subpart A yet. We're into like the preamble. There's a few executive orders that carried over from the Trump administration that are still in there. And I'm going to go through them quickly. Some of them make sense. Some of them you might be scratching your head over. This is the first one. It's a carryover from the Trump administration. Buy American, buy domestic. But in particular, the Trump administration, and it's still there, encouraged the use of goods, products, and materials built in the United States, but with an emphasis on construction-related items. You can see there goods of iron, steel, cement, aggregate. Cement is made from several different things, and that's why they're talking about aggregate. Aluminum, plastic, polymer-based products, that's your PVC, and polyvinyl pipe, that's PVC, I'm sorry. Glass, optical fiber, and lumber. Lumber is already being priced out of the market, in my opinion. It's very, very expensive these days. Lumber has skyrocketed in price, and now we have limitations on the purchase suggested. It's not a moratorium, but it's encouraged us to buy lumber domestically. It's going to be a real challenge for tribes that overlap into Canada, like the St. Regis Mohawks, for example, half in upstate New York and half in Canada. And that's going to be a challenge for some. But anyway, I want you to be aware that exists. And now you can go into the uniform guidance and you can Google, go to 2CFR, go to ecfr.gov and put in the uniform guidance and then put in President's Management Agenda, and you'll come up, you'll be able to find these just like I did. Support the President's Management Agenda, something that may not be, they're trying to standardize the verbiage throughout the document. And as you can see in the second bullet there, the term obligation has been replaced with financial obligation pertaining to monetary situations or responsibility. So there's some vernacular changes, but they're minor throughout the document. Jumped over one. 3, performance and risk. This is a big issue, even though it's just barely scratched the surface here. Improving the governance-wide, which means agency-wide approach to performance in government. What this means, folks, is there's more and more pressure being put on the federal agencies to move towards performance-based measurements and risk mitigation, 2 separate things, but they're both equally important. We're moving more and more towards data-driven reports, data-driven management. Data performance management is what it's talking about. You can read more on it, 2 CFR Part 200-202, Program Planning and Design, where you can read up on the fact that the federal government is getting pressure at the agencies, and then they're transmitting that pressure to us in more performance-based measures. Okay, you're going to see that more and more and more and more. Also, risk mitigation because of fraud, because of identity theft, more and more across the country, because of malware. Even the whole city of Las Vegas and all the casinos, remember not too long ago, had that ransomware situation. This is becoming more and more prevalent. Risk is becoming more and more of an issue, and it's trickling down to all the different functions that we have to buy, including auditing, which we'll get to tomorrow. But you can count on the fact that there's going to be more data-driven pressures put on us as federal funding recipients and more risk mitigation. Policies, internal controls is what it's going to come down to for us. We'll get into a couple of those very specific risk mitigation issues as we progress through the program here. More on the federal agencies. This goes hand in hand with the prior one. Machine readable, data driven, machine readable information, more and more and more into the data performance management arena. Okay, more machine readable compatibility things. We're seeing that trend. All right, this one is definitely, you're going to look at this, scratch your head and go, why? This is a Trump administration carryover. Limitation on telecommunication and video surveillance equipment made specifically by 6 or 7 Chinese companies, and they're named specifically in the uniform guidance. In fact, you can even go to 2 CFR Part 200-216 and read about this telecommunication and video surveillance. So what does that mean? That means AV equipment, that means low voltage cabling, that means the surveillance equipment that we use on our properties to protect our property, to protect our people. Some of those, if they're manufactured in these Chinese companies that you can see literally listed on the screen there, the service agreements that come with it, there's a moratorium, cannot purchase from that. So it might be a moot issue for you. I just want you to be aware that we have some of these crazy things in the uniform guidance to be aware of. Limitations on buying domestic, prohibition on certain telecommunication and video surveillance equipment. And that's, it is what it is. Also, from the Trump administration, it's kind of redundant to say, do not contract with the enemy. Why would this even be here? Well, it's not going to affect any tribe or tribal entity, but it could affect some of the other federal funding recipients like the U.S. Army, the Marines. They all are recipients of federal funding just as we are. They get billions of dollars. We get a fraction of that. But this applies more to them than it does to us. But nevertheless, it's there. We need to be aware of it. don't ever, hopefully Canada and Mexico don't become enemies. I gotta wonder sometimes about some of the political positions we have, especially with Mexico. You don't know what's going to happen with what's going on down there. So just another one of those regulations to be aware of. All right, it goes on to talk about clarifying requirements. Procurements must comply with your internal controls and procurement standards. You would think that is common sense, that you've got to have internal controls in three major areas: operation, finance, and compliance. And what it's saying here is all of your procurement, all of your purchases must comply with your internal controls, the policies and procedures that make up your internal controls. And those internal controls must be in sync with the federal regulations as they currently exist, like what we're doing now, and where they could go into the future with the changes. So all of these things tie together, and they're saying saying the same thing in different ways. Okay. Each purchase complies with your written policies and procedures. Your written policies and procedures must be in sync with your internal controls. Your internal controls must be in sync with the federal regs. That's what we're doing here to make sure every purchase is necessary. We'll get more into that in subpart D. There's open competition. That's also in subpart D, more detail. There's no conflict of interest either in your operation or with the vendor. There's, everything is clearly defined. There is documentation for every single purchase. You've got procurement in place. You've got your own internal controls and policies and procedures that outline your procurement. And every single transaction you do, regardless what the federal government says, they have different definitions of what they consider a small purchase and a micro purchase. We'll get into that crazy discussion in a minute. The bottom bullet there is the most important. You document every single purchase, whether it's paper clips for the office or whether it's the lumber and PVC pipe for your home construction in the field and everything in between. You have a procurement process that addresses every single procurement, regardless of the dollar value. The dollar amount, in my opinion, my humble opinion, is irregardless of what's happening here. We need documentation to justify our procurement. That's what compliance is all about: documentation and consistency. And after 12 years of doing that, I speak with some authority saying you've got to document everything you do all along the way. All right, questions. We've already dipped our toe into the boiling hot water of federal regs. So let's keep going with our navigation, identification, interpretation, and implementation of federal guidelines. Subpart A. Now we get into what the definitions, what the federal government, their verbiage, and I want to point out a few things as we go through here. Some of it is inconsequential, straightforward, acquisition cost. Here we're talking about accounting procedures, accepted accounting procedures. If you get an ICDG grant,
you have a question from the chat.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Laura's asking, if you get an ICDBG grant, do you need to have HUD regulations in your fiscal policies and procedures?
Well, ICDBG, along with the Indian Housing Block Grant, IHBG, come from HUD. So as far as I know, both of those federal fundings flow through ONAP, Office of Native American Programs. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know the Indian Housing Block Grant does. So with that in mind, if you're talking about ICDBG, if you're talking about Indian Housing Block Grant, there is regulation, and you may want to write this down if you're not already familiar with it, 24 CFR Part 1000. And that is HUD's regulations on Native American housing activities. That's the document. So when I was talking about how agencies have their own set of regulations that might be above and beyond with more restrictions than what we're talking about here in the Uniform Guidance, that's one example. Indian Housing Block Grant, 24 CFR Part 1000, right, Native American housing activities is that document. The nice thing about that particular document for housing is it's written in a narrative format. It's very user-friendly. It's easy. It's easy to follow. So yeah, excellent question, and that would be my short answer to that. All right, acquisition cost. Good question. Thank you. Looking for, or it looks like she's typing. Okay. So, like I said, a lot of these are pretty straightforward. Budget period. That's no surprises there. Capital assets following generally accepted accounting principles. Nothing surprise. Here's where I want to hover for a minute. I want to talk about something that's new in the federal regulations, and that's what they refer to as computing devices. That is our smartphones. Okay, Laura's got another question. Do you enter the full policies, or can you make a reference such as we will follow 24 CFR Part 1000? Now that we're in your internal controls. You probably want to do both, Laura. You probably want to reference in your internal controls that you do follow the uniform guidance and you up-to-date version of it, and you do follow the most recent version of the 24 CFR Part 1000 Native American housing activities. But you're probably going to want to, within your policies and procedures, you may want to consider referencing certain sections of it. If you differ, you want to get familiar with both sets of regulations like you were doing here with the uniform. If you differ from what's different, if your policies are different than what we're presenting here, how do you deal with that? So the answer is both. There might be places where you need to address specific areas of the policy and say basically we're doing this a little bit different here. At the Native Learning Center and at the Seminole Tribe of Florida, there were circumstances where we didn't actually follow the federal guidelines word for word. We had our own internal interpretation of it. Now the deal is, as long as you can define what that is and you can defend it, in other words, it's not crazy, you can do that. There's a lot of flexibility in these controls. What we're trying to do here is understand the federal government's interpretation, like with computing devices. This is relatively new. It means machines used to acquire, store, analyze, process, publish data. Now these days, that's a smartphone that they're describing, right? It can do all of those things. That used to be, back in the day, that used to be described as equipment. And if it's equipment, then we get into depreciation. It's treated differently. Now it's considered a supply. So they have two ways to look at it. One is, what is the function of it? A lot of things are moving from being once classified as equipment now over to a supply, like computing devices. And the dollar amount there, $5,000 is the current threshold for considering a supply like computing devices as a supply. Now they're talking about, see the little box below it? It says there might be a change. They're talking about increasing that 5,000 to 10,000. That's in our favor. That allows even more devices, more what used to be supplies to now be considered, what used to be considered equipment, now considered a supply. More on that as we progress. Good point. Okay, contract's pretty straightforward. Contractor, corrective action. A corrective action is hopefully something you'll never have to do. A corrective action is something that happens when there's a finding on an audit, on a single audit, and it's not resolved during the audit, which means it's egregious, and that means that there's a real problem. And a corrective action basically is management answer to what the finding is and how you're going to resolve the problem. So hopefully, if we're doing everything correctly, we don't have findings and we don't have to do corrective actions. Cost objective, cost sharing. You've seen grants, I'm sure, that have a match. I think ICDBG's got a match. I know Indian Housing Block Grants got a 20% match. A lot of grants have what they call sharing or matching requirements. Grant writers need to be aware of this. Now, the new regulations coming out, what federal government is saying is there's some confusion between sharing and matching. To me, they're interchangeable words or phrases. The federal government says we're going to eliminate the word matching, and just rely on the phrase cost sharing as the phrase for a percentage that the grantee has to put towards the cost of the program. Now, they haven't done anything yet. You're still going to see both of those phrases or words scattered throughout the document and scattered throughout grant applications. They haven't eliminated that yet. So that's kind of a semantic, small change. All right, cost. This is all accounting stuff. The cost of questions, cost disallowed. These are all things that auditors look for. We'll talk about this in subpart F. Cost in question, when the auditor comes in and basically wants to know why you spent federal funds on, this particular service or entity. It's not allowable. It's going to be a questionable cost, and that could result in a finding. Same thing with disallowed costs. So these are phrases that we don't want to. We need to know what they mean and how they come about, but we don't want to get into them, right? What we do want to get into is this one. Here's equipment. Right now, equipment has a useful life of more than 1 year. That's one of the measures that they have. And the other one is the dollar amount. You see at the bottom of the top paragraph, it says $5,000. That is the current threshold right now. So they look at it two ways. It's useful life and the dollar value. Now they're talking about increasing that threshold, as you can see in the box in the bottom right, to $10,000. It's not there yet, but I want you to make a note of that's one of the proposed changes. Supplies from $5,000 to $10,000, and now equipment from $5,000 to $10,000. Not approved yet, on the horizon. Hopefully it works out. And then there's a little bit of information in the difference between general equipment and specialty equipment. Most of the time, specialty equipment is related to medical facilities, as you can see, medical equipment, technical equipment. So most of the time, we're dealing with general equipment, if we have equipment at all. All right, but market supplies and equipment, cost sharing, matching, that's the third category. All right, we've got expenditures, nothing unusual there. Financial obligation, we all have a financial obligation. We're all responsible for the federal funds. That's why we have internal controls. Information technology system means computing devices, ancillary equipment, software, similar to procedure services. You want to probably do a little bit of drilling down on this to see if your IT system that you might have, is it specialty software that was designed for your program? If so, it might be intangible property. It might be, it's definitely information technology. Can it be treated as a supply, or does it fall over on the side of equipment? We've got our two measures to look at: cost and useful life. My experience with useful life is nothing. It changes constantly with information technology. There's always upgrades. So I look at it, even the software that we have, as a supply rather than equipment, because it has a very short shelf life, right? It has a very short lifespan. It's constantly being upgraded. It's a living document, so to speak, or a process. So it's constantly under renewal. I treat it as a supply. It's also intangible property. Who owns it? Probably the tribe's going to own it, right? If you're affiliated with a tribe. No physical existence. This is new. Intangible property never existed in the federal regs, but now it's included. So software is included in there, whether you treat it as equipment or supply. Intangible property is basically tangible now, according to the federal guidelines. So something to keep in mind. Here's the big one that I want to hover on for a minute, because it's probably one of the smallest regulations in the whole thing. We're in subpart A now. Hold on a second. We jump from, we're still in definitions. Okay. Subpart A, still definitions. I'm going to move a little quicker after this. Internal controls, probably the shortest, one of the shortest citations in the regulations with the biggest impact. Internal controls means if you receive federal funds, it means the process that you have designed and implemented on your end as the non-federal entity, the federal funding recipient, to provide what, and write this phrase down if you haven't already, reasonable assurance. This is a phrase taken right out of the regulations, reasonable assurance. What reasonable assurance means is with the best of intentions, to the best of our ability. So what we want to do using this phrase, reasonable assurance, is make sure that all of our internal controls, all of our policies and procedures start with that phraseology. This policy with reasonable assurance is a conflict of interest policy. So with reasonable assurance, we're putting this policy into effect that says all of our vendors and all of our employees and all of our members should not have a conflict of interest. If they do, they should declare what that interest is. I'm talking more about using the phrase reasonable assurance. It's our safety net of, when the Fed sees that, if I were the auditor coming in and I see you use this phrase reasonable assurance, what I'm thinking is, oh, these people get it. They know that what they're saying is, to the best of our ability, we are trying to maintain effective and efficient operations. With reasonable assurance, we are attempting to be reliability of reporting internal controls and compliance. We're trying to do the best of what we can do, given, because nothing is given, nothing is perfect, nothing's 100%, nothing. So use the federal government's phraseology to explain your programs and provide yourself with a little bit of cushion. The next one I want to point out is part of that risk mitigation, fraud, and that is personally identifiable information. This is becoming more and more of an issue as we become more data driven, more performance driven, more risk management oriented, and getting the pressure to do so. We also have to identify and put into effect internal controls pertaining to what is personally identifiable information. Is it social security number, date of birth, marital status? Is it home address, telephone number, date of birth? Is it biometrics like our fingerprint scan, eye scan, whatever they're doing these days, facial scan? That's all biometrics. It identifies who we are, and it links our identity to who we are to the information that comes with us. So we need to do the same thing. And what this regulation is talking about is federal funding recipients, whether we do hard copy versions of everything or whether we've moved over to electronic data, we need to have mechanisms in both places that identify what is gathered by your organization to do business. For example, if it's housing, you might be collecting last year's income statements, proof of income, W-2 forms, or tax forms that were submitted, or social security number, all of marital status, all of those things that help probably a person who wants to rent or own property. That's just one example. That's all examples of personally identifiable information. The federal government is saying you better have controls in place to identify what it is, educate everyone within your circle of influence what those identities are, and then be able to articulate how you're protecting that information. So for example, if it's hard copy, you've got literally have a locked filing cabinet where you put that information with only certain people allowed to have access. If it's electronic or a combination of hard copy and electronic data, you've got a separate drive on your system. Your IT people have set up a separate limited access drive or a place to put that information with limited access by certain people. Only people that can view it, and even less people who can view it and change, add, delete, that kind of stuff. You've got to have more and more. This is real. I'm not making this up. This is stuff that is becoming more and more prevalent. The Seminole Tribe of Florida had what's called the Chronos system, which was a biometric scanning device. Maybe they've changed that now. They've probably got that as an app on the phone now. But it used to be a box sitting on the wall in every building and employees would get a 4-digit number and a fingerprint scan, and that's how they logged in the morning, went to lunch, came back, and left at the end of the day. They would have to log in. That's a biometric system. And it contained all human resource information in a fingertip, literally and figuratively. So that had to be included in the Native Learning Center's internal controls, how to protect that information. And the Seminole Tribe of Florida had to have policies at the corporate level as well. See where I'm going with this? So, you know, this is becoming more and more. Here's the supply I was talking about. Same thing as equipment. The supply is going up. Right now it's 5,000, and as you can see in the box on the right, they're talking about increasing that to 10,000, but it's not at 10,000 yet. Okay, let's skip over that. Okay, that's subpart A. Let's see how we're doing for time. I gotta keep moving here. Keep moving. All right, quick question, a quiz here. If federal funds are used to purchase tribe-issued smartphones for employees, are the devices to be treated as specialty equipment? Yes, as specialty equipment. The cost of each device must be something. No, the device are considered a supply. Or C, neither A or B, smartphones are not an allowable or allocable cost item for federal funding, according to subpart E. What will it be? What's your answer there? It's a good question. We talked about it, right? Smartphones, smart devices. I'm going to keep moving along. Let's take a look. The devices are considered a supply, as I mentioned before. They are a supply these days, unless you've got some kind of outrageous, fancy, very, very expensive, and then it probably would not be considered a supply anyway, even at the new dollar threshold of $10,000 yet to be approved. But for the most part, those kind of things.
Vince, we have a question in the chat. Marvin's asking, is the federal government providing the funds to make all these improvements?
Is the federal government providing the funds to make all these improvements? No. If you're talking about your funding for the particular grant, whether it's Indian Housing Block Grant or ICDBG, no, the cost of these restrictions is really, the burden is on us. Sorry to say, don't shoot the messenger. We're responsible for implementing these changes. Now, I'm happy to report that a lot of these changes are more procedural than they are cost related at this point. Yeah. Is the federal government providing the funds to make? Yeah, no, they're not. You know, if anything, federal funds are not increasing. We've got sequestration to deal with, which is the steady reduction of federal funding across the board for all agencies. So we get stuck with trying to implement these changes, these internal controls. That's why, that's why I'm preaching the fact that it's so important to be able to understand these regulations, as crazy as some of them may be, and what we need to do to put them in place. And hopefully we can come up with ways that are not cost prohibitive on our end to implement some of this stuff and still meet the letter of the law. Okay? I mean, that's what we're trying to do. Make it all work, right? With these, first of all, understand them, interpret them where we need to, and then try to deal with them in a best environment. That's what compliance people try to do, try to make it all, now I don't want to say burn the candle at both ends, but just try to make it all work. Okay, now we're moving into subpart B. Let's move through B and C at least. Let's try to get through here. B, I'm going to move through quickly because almost all of this stuff pertains to the agencies and not so much to the recipients. But I think I'll point out a couple that might have a trickle-down effect on us. Not applicability, not purpose. We're talking about all these things here, so all the different subparts. So this was just what this is talking about here are the old citations that once existed that were combined into the super circular. So they're talking about the old references. I'm not even going to hover on them because they don't exist anymore. We've got the super circular now. Okay. Want to see if this got anything. Now, 106 agency implementation. Yeah, they're all responsible for implementing the program. This gives them basically control, gives the federal agencies control over their respective program. This one talks about the super circular when it went into effect. It's been in effect for 5 or 6 years now. December 26, 2017. So we're coming up on a 6-year anniversary next week. So okay. Mandatory disclosures. What this is talking about is the federal government wants us to report to them if we're doing anything that's out of sync with compliance. Okay. And they've also built in with mandatory disclosure and that requirement, here's the obvious: criminal law, fraud, bribery, all those kind of things. But, they're also talking about prior approvals here. There's about 15 prior approvals built into the federal guidelines. Good news is they're trying to reduce that from 15 down to 5. Can we get a copy of the PowerPoint? I'm going to bounce that back to Brooke to answer that question. Short answer is yes. You should be able to get this. In fact, I think it's here. I think in your
Yeah, it's the first item in the files pod.
Yeah.
If you go to that box labeled files all the way to the left, a copy of today's slides, a PDF of them, that's the first item on there. If you just hover over it, you can download with the down arrow. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good to go. Okay, we talked about A, we talked about B. So let's get into with the time we have, 30 plus or minus minutes, to get through C, and we'll scratch the surface of D if possible. Okay. Oops. Nope. I didn't get even a chance to look at it myself. It went up so fast. Subpart A, Subpart B, uniform guidance. Oh, thank you. I couldn't see it. Subpart A and B, uniform guidance. I went right to the answer. 2 CFR 2 apply to the following: all federal awards. Yeah, sorry, we missed the question. What we've been talking about so far, in fact, all of these federal regulations, all of the subparts, A, B, C, D, E, and F, apply to C, all federal awards, regardless of the type of entity you are: tribe, tribal, nonprofit, institution of higher education, faith-based organization. If you're a recipient of federal funds, these apply to you. So now we're going to go into C. Try to get through C, because now we're getting a little closer. Subpart C's got some requirements that do have application to us. We'll try to find what those are and talk about them a little bit. All right. Let's keep going here. C. There's again, ecfr.gov, my favorite go-to place. That's the QR code for it, for finding the federal regulation in a user-friendly format, instead of relying on what's called the Federal Register, which is written in columns that are vertical, very difficult to read. ecfr.gov, its regulations are laid out horizontally as if you're reading a document, a novel, and everything's there. It's just much more user-friendly. I strongly recommend that you go to one of these locations, go to ecfr.gov, download the uniform guidance. You'll find it by 2 CFR Part 200. That's how you identify it. Download it to your laptop, download it to your desktop, download it to your phone if you want to. And if you've got the printer for it, now you're talking a couple hundred pages, but print it out. I printed it out. You want to make sure you have the most recent version. And so that would be, I think it's December of 2022. So we're coming up on a year. That's the most recent version of the current regulations. And keep in mind, over on the left side of your screen, number 3, uniform guidance updates. Download that one as well. Those are the proposed updates to the current regulations. You want to have both so you know what they are now. That's your baseline. And then you'll have also what they're proposing to change. If you just download the updates, you might get lost because you're not going to have a baseline to compare it to. So make sure you have that. Okay. Subpart C, pre-federal award requirements. Some of this pertains to us. So let's get to the areas that do. Here we get into, oh, by the way, what we're going through here, you can see at the top, at the very top, it says updates to federal grant regulations, highlights of subpart C. That's where we are now. We're just getting started. Below that is the title of the subpart, pre-federal award requirements. That's subpart C, 2 CFR part 200.200. And that's how they do it. Subpart C is what I refer to as the 200s. So subpart B would have been the 100s, right? And then subpart A would be, it's just referred, subpart A is simply referred to as 2 CFR part 200.1. That's it. Then we get into B, that's the 100s. Then we get into C, the 200s, and so on. D will become the 300s. Another way to reference things. Now, pre-federal award requirements is more agency-driven. Again, more agency-driven. But let's see if there's anything in here that falls on us. Oh, already we've got some information that's going to trickle down to us. Let's see. Required for private non-notice. Okay. Notices that have to be put out by the federal agency. 2 CFR Part 200-204, notice of funding opportunities. They are talking about changing the NOFOs, notice of funding opportunities. This would apply more towards the grant writers. Right now, those notices are very, you probably agree with me, very difficult to follow, very difficult to navigate, confusing. Even the federal government recognizes that. And so what they're doing, it says, for competitive grants and cooperative agreements, the federal awarding agency must announce specific funding opportunities by providing information in a public notice. They're trying to, I'll give them a little bit of credit for this, they're trying to clean up those notices so they're more user-friendly, more readable. And they're very confusing at a minimum. So I'm glad they're doing this. I'd like to see that process streamlined, especially for small tribes, small nonprofits, don't have the resources to farm it out to a grant writer, don't have the staff internally. This could be a big issue, a big hurdle. And I'm hoping that there's some improvements made at the agency level. So more conditions at the agency level in the 200, subpart C. Nothing so far that would have any significance to us. Reporting a determination. Now, there is this issue here. They are reporting a determination that the recipient of federal funding, the non-federal entity, is not qualified for a federal award. This could happen because of a poor audit. This could happen because of a series of complaints made to an ONAP office or an agency, and the funding agency is obligated to mitigate the risk and to identify problems. And, you know, perhaps if the allegations or findings are severe, there might be a holding of future funds or even a debarment, a suspension, or even a debarment. So they are obligated to follow up. What this is saying, they're obligated to follow up on discrepancies and problems in with funding recipients. So just know that they are never contract with the enemy. Here it is again, even for them, even for federal agencies. Here's the telecommunications. This is where it lives. So 215 and 216. This is in subpart C. Again, these are either prohibitions like a moratorium or suggestions. So here's that telecommunication one I alluded to a little while ago. And that's all I'm going to do in subpart C. I am glad we got through that part. There's not much in C that pertains to us. Now, little quiz here for competitive grant. There you go. If you can move that over so I can read it just a little. Okay. For competitive grants and cooperative agreements, the federal awarding agency must announce specific funding opportunities by providing information in a, and then options here are a public notice as stated in 2 CFR Part 200-204, Federal Register stated in 2 CFR Part 200-205, Request for proposal is stated in 2 CFR Part 320. Interagency announcement as stated in 2 CFR Part 200. Now, what section did we just come out of? The 100s, the 200s, or the 300s? You remember? Public notice is stated in 2 CFR Part 200, 204. So again, just an exercise of how to find things. Another pull. Let's go, before we get into D, slow things down for a minute, talk about internal controls, policies and procedures. We know from what I alluded to before that internal controls are considerably important. How familiar are you with internal controls, policies and procedures, and what's called self-monitoring process, aka internal controls? I'm not aware of these. Tell me more. That's A. B, I've heard of these, but don't know any of the real details. C, don't these answers look like the first poll? I know of these processes and the requirements. And D, you're the resident expert on it. Where are we on that? So we want to go to the poll. Let's see what we're getting. You can pull that up. There we go. Those are your 4 options. Where are we? Okay. Whoa, I know of these processes and requirements. Very good. Good mix there. Okay, now it's splitting up a little bit as the answers come in. Predominantly, you're familiar with the process and requirements. Very good. Very good. In my opinion, one of the most important, resident expert, wow, one of the most important areas of federal funding requirements is understanding the particulars of internal controls. And this is where we get into it in sections D, E, and F. We'll start with D, which is post-award requirements. We'll really start getting into it. This is a particular, now I'm going to call your area, we have, 25 minutes left here on the clock to talk about D, or at least, get started on it. There's a lot of information starting in subpart D that really pertains to us on a daily level, because we know we've got to have internal controls in 3 major areas: operation, finance, and compliance. So, and this is where we get into those things. So let's get started. Again, there's that ecfr.gov, the QR code to that site for the uniform guidance. This is the 300s, okay? The subpart D, 203, 2 CFR Part 200.300, the very beginning of subpart D, statutory national policy requirements. No surprise there. Oops, did I jump over one? No, here we go. The second one, as I alluded to at the very beginning, performance measurements requires that we are to regulate financial data to perform accomplishments and provide cost information to demonstrate cost effectiveness practices. Now, this really hasn't changed. There's no change to performance measurement coming up in the proposed changes to the uniform guidance. If anything, there's double downing on it. There's more emphasis on performance measurement, data collection. We are seeing, for example, we are seeing all of our reports. I'm most familiar with the Indian Housing Block Grant as it's morphed and transitioned over the past 5 years from a Word document to an Excel sheet to a fillable PDF to the EPIC system, and now to what's called the GEMS system. Both EPIC and GEMS were online systems put in place through the Office of Native American Programs, a subdivision of HUD. More and more data-driven activities, and that's what we're seeing. If anything, it's going to become more intense. It's more intense from an auditing standpoint, more intense from a performance standpoint, and more intense from a grant writing standpoint. Grant writers are now seeing more and more obligations put on them to provide what's called logic models, where they predict goals with tangible outcomes, measurable outcomes that lead to tangible results, all data driven. This is in not just in federal agencies. We're seeing this in the philanthropic community. So even on the private side, we're seeing this type of more data-driven activity. Okay, I think part of this too is the elimination, the fraud and the risk, and the more we deal with numbers and the less we have to interpret them. They always say numbers don't lie. So it kind of reduces the chance of fraud, at least in the eyes of the federal government. So we're putting more and more emphasis on performance measurements, even at the employee level, So everywhere, every way, shape, and form. And that's the requirement. And here, along with that performance measurement, we got the big three. We got performance measurements. That was 301. So 2 CFR Part 200, 301. Then we go into 302. Financial management. You've got to have internal controls in 3 areas, as I mentioned: operation, financial activities, and compliance. Here we've got the financial activities, financial management. Generally accepted accounting practices are the rule, right? But it does have some specifics. If you go to the actual regulations, it's pretty well spelled out. I just captured, the gist of the 6 major areas: identification and separation of all federal awards, accurate, current, complete disclosure of financial results, records that identify the source of funds, effective control of funds, that's part of your internal controls, property and all of your assets, comparison of expenditures last year to this year, that type of standard procedure, and of course, written procedures. Pretty straightforward. The one that's less specific is this one, which is kind of the mother of all internal controls, and that is 2 CFR Part 200, 303, internal controls. There's not much here. What you see on the screen is I think this is verbatim, right out of the requirements. There's not much there, but the words there are pretty powerful. So let's go through each one of these 5 different areas so you have an understanding what internal controls means. Again, one of the smallest paragraphs on all of the uniform guidance with the most significance, because it's impossible to put in place internal controls if you don't understand the regulations, where the regulations are going, and how to fit your internal controls, your policies and procedures to, you've got to be able to navigate, interpret, and implement before you can do any of this. Establish and maintain effective internal control over your entire program. Not the federal award, there should be an S after that. After all federal awards, that provides, there's that phrase again, reasonable assurance. Again, their phrase, reasonable assurance, aka to the best of your ability, that the non-federal entity is managing the award in compliance with statutes, regulations, terms, conditions, tribal protocols, best practices, et cetera, et cetera. B, complies with the Constitution. Well, it wouldn't be a federal grant if it didn't. Federal statutes, regulations, a little redundant. C, that you evaluate and monitor your compliance. There's the compliance part, that you evaluate and monitor. Doesn't tell you how to monitor, doesn't tell you how frequently to monitor. It just says to monitor and evaluate your performance, right? All of these things tie together. Right? D, take action when you need to. If you're monitoring and making sure you're compliant, when you find discrepancies, small ones, medium ones, large ones, you take action to correct them. Hopefully, your action and your self-monitoring occurs before your audit occurs, especially if there is some kind of discrepancy or some kind of breakdown in the process. You want to find those internally. That's why we do self-monitoring on perhaps a quarterly basis, at least self-monitoring, or a semi-annual, so that we can identify and mitigate potential discrepancies before we have to submit a report saying how effective is our operation, compliance, and financial activities. That makes sense? Then the last one, take reasonable measures to safeguard PII. That's the phrase that the Fed uses, PII, for personally identifiable information, or the protection of So PPII, protection of personally identifiable information, more and more and more critical as we move towards performance measures, data-driven activities, internal control requirements. And folks, the regulations and proposed updates are not softening these requirements. If anything, they're tightening the reins a little bit more for us and for the auditors and for the agencies. There's more scrutiny, more tightness, more data driven than ever before. And at the same time, to answer Marvin's comment about who's funding for this, it's certainly not the federal government. They're getting, for many reasons, they've got this current Congress to deal with that can't get their, I don't want to go there, I'm sorry. They're dealing with that, trying to get appropriations approved, and that's got to be a nightmare trying to get that. And they're also dealing with sequestration, the continual reduction of federal funding across the board, money saving, federal savings process that was put into effect 7 or 8 or 9 years ago. So they got all of these mitigating forces. So fun, it's basically, you've heard the expression, if it's going to be, it's up to me. That's what we're doing here. We cannot rely totally on the federal government to bail us out, to help us. If anything, the reins are getting tighter and tighter, and we need to turn internally. Speaking of internal controls, we need to turn internally to find mechanisms and processes internally to help us move forward. We need to constantly be looking for other funding opportunities in the greater philanthropic community. So I know we have a lot of federal agency funding. We also need to consider private sector funding as well. But, they have restrictions as well. So program, we jumped, didn't we? So I apologize. You jumped. Here's where we were. Here's just an example. These next couple slides are just examples of some of the monitoring areas on the operations side, some of the policies that fall under internal controls. You can see there's a list. You probably have all of these and many, many more. These are just samples of some of the policies. Code of conduct, conflict of interest are the big two to start with, nepotism, financial management, procurement, Indian preference, native preference, et cetera, et cetera. On the bottom right, you see the self-monitoring in itself should be a requirement that you do it. What do you do with it once you have self-monitoring done? You should be doing it frequently. It's basically an internal audit, so you're trying to find discrepancies before they become issues and then trying to rectify them. Okay. More, just some more. Now this one tends to be more housing related. You probably, not all of you are housing related, but you know what I mean. You've got specific agency driven policies as well as more operational type things as well. We talked about the cost sharing matching requirement. This is a semantics type of thing. They're trying to figure out which phrase they want to use. Program income is not changing. You can still generate program income with most of the federal funds. You can go here to 200-307 to look up more information on how you can generate program income and how you can use it, and does it in any way, shape, or form affect your subsequent funding. There might be a monetary threshold. There is not a monetary threshold in the uniform guidance. However, there might be a monetary threshold in some of your agency funding, like with HUD under the EWONAP program, Indian Housing Block Grant. There is a threshold of $25,000 in program income. If you're able to generate that kind of money, more power to you. But there might be some, what I'm saying here is there might be some protocols in place on the agency side, not on the uniform guidance side. Revision the budget, these kind of things take what's called prior approval. They're talking about reducing some of those prior approvals, insurance coverage as well. You got to have that. Here's the equipment thing I was talking about earlier with the 5,000 threshold. This is where it lives, 2 CFR Part 200-313. You can go here, do a deep dive if you wish on equipment. You'll read about the $5,000 threshold. but know that it might go up to 10. Okay. General procurement standards. No real change in this whole area with the exception of one thing. And must have written procedures. That's not a change. Well, let me see if I can find it. Here it is, highlighted in red. The only thing that's changing in the whole procurement, and that would include all of 2 CFR Part 200, 320, which is a big area. It talks about sealed bids, it talks about competitive purchases, and it talks about sole source on there. Nothing's changed with the exception of sealed bids, potentially. That might change. Right now, the requirement is that all sealed bids for a general contractor, for an architect or engineer, wherever you use the sealed bid process, part of that protocol, as outlined in the uniform guidance, is to have a public opening of the sealed bids. Public opening in a public arena of some kind. They are talking about eliminating that particular requirement of the sealed bid process for tribes. So that's built in to the updates. Let's hope that happens. That would take some pressure off of tribes and tribal entities that use sealed bids for their construction processes. That's a good thing. Okay, Davis-Bacon, next one. I want you to get familiar with this. If you do any type of construction, if you obligate or spend more than $2,000, you are in the realm of Davis-Bacon legislation. A whole nother set of legislation. Now you're dealing with the Department of Labor and wage and hour division, because Davis-Bacon requires prevailing wages, basically union wages on all construction where you're obligated, and it's a low dollar threshold, $2,000. It's not much. Then you fall into that realm, and you've got certified payroll records. Keep in mind, Davis-Bacon, do I have it here? Okay, on the bottom left of your screen on the files, number 4, Davis-Bacon updates. There is a final rule for Davis-Bacon. They changed it, haven't had a change since the Nixon administration, like 50 years ago, when Davis-Bacon was originally rolled out, became legislation. They've got to change its final rule. Good news is they're minor changes. They don't have a lot of impact on what we do day to day. There's redistribution of small population areas. That's more on the Department of Labor than it is on us as recipients of Davis-Bacon. Okay, Davis-Bacon is not funding. It's legislation for using federal funds for construction over $2,000, using prevailing wages for the trade and the state and the county, and certified payroll records to verify that they're being paid according to prevailing wage standards provided by the Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor. So it's not funding per se, it's regulation, pure regulation. Okay. Good stuff. None of this has changed. No changes here. Contracting with small minority women, business enterprises, labor surplus areas, if you can find them. Domestic preference by American, that's still a carryover. That none of that has changed in these regulations. None of the bonding requirements have changed, increased, or decreased for your general contractors. Nothing has changed there. Monitoring, self-monitoring that I was talking about before in program reporting, 2 CFR Part 329, just tightening up a little bit on the requirements. No major changes other than what I talked about before. It says over there in the red highlights in that yellow box, it talks about emphasis on measuring more data-driven, more customer service is where we're going. Yeah, we're moving in that direction. That's what all this monitoring and performance measurement is ultimately going to result in my opinion, is measures on customer satisfaction, like hotels and hospitals are moving that way. More and more protocols are measuring patient satisfaction. I think what we're seeing is that same transition moving in that way, regardless of what we do. So, stand by. That we're going to see that, I think. Okay, retention of records. These regulations say 3 years. IRS regulations for our taxes that we do at home, our 1040s, that's 7 years. personally, I don't think 3 years is enough to retain our corporate records. You meet the letter of the law by having 3, but it's not a practical thing to destroy these records after 3 years. You never know when you're going to be asked to provide electronic data or even hard copy data after a 3-year period. So 3-year retention of records, that's the letter of the law according to the uniform guidance, but I strongly recommend you lean more towards the IRS recommendation of at least 7 years, whether it's hard copy or electronic data. Okay, so that's where it lives. 2 CFR Part 200-334, retention for records and access to records. Whew, look at that. We're doing good. Now we're done. We did A and B, we did C, and we went through D. This is really good. Let's see, I think we have a quiz coming up here. Yeah, let's finish out here with the quiz. 200.324. Retention, if you could move that over a little bit more, can't quite read the quiz. There we go. Retention requirements for records states that financial records, supporting documents, statistical records, and all other non-federal entity records pertinent to the federal award must be retained for a period of blank blank from the date of submission of the final expense. We just talked about that. What would the answer be according to the uniform guidance? Now let's just jump right into it because we just talked about this less than a minute ago. They say 3 years. My humble opinion, you need more than 3. Personal experience with the Native Learning Center and Seminole Tribe, investigating not on us, but wanting Office of Inspector General wanting information going back even farther than 7 years. We were able to resurrect hard copies, believe it or not, of activity back to when they wanted it, which was 10 or 15 years. No, couldn't have been 15 years. Native Learning Center wasn't that old. At least 7 years back, and we were able to do it. So you never know when you're going to be asked to provide that information or use it as a reference for something positive. All right, let's go back now, because what we have tomorrow is on the right side of the screen. Part 3 and 4 are combined. That's basically tomorrow's agenda on the right side of the screen. Highlights of subpart E, basically cost principles and general provisions for selected item of cost. What does that mean? If you're not familiar with the regulations, what it means is what is allowable and what is not allowable. What is allocable to a cost item and what is not allocable. What is a direct cost? What is indirect cost? That's all in subpart E. Then we'll finish up the second half of the program with subpart F, and that is all about audits. Audit requirements. Appendix 1 really is a supplement to what we're talking about, but really subpart E will finish up with the audit requirements, and that's it. So tomorrow, I'll kick this back over to Brooke to close out. Hopefully, I'll see everyone tomorrow, same time, Eastern to 3:30. Look forward to seeing you all here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vince. We all appreciate your time and effort with the presentation. I know everyone certainly learned a lot. If you guys wouldn't mind to please take a moment to complete our webinar feedback survey. I've just launched it on everybody's screen. It only takes a few minutes. It is anonymous, but you could just tell us what you think is going well, what you think we maybe need to work on, and that way we can continue to create great webinars and to serve Indian country even better. Just like Vince said, the next webinar we have is tomorrow, same time. This is going to be, that should actually say part 2 for the updates to federal regulations. As always, registration is free. Feel free to access this and any other recorded webinars online. They're all on our website, nativelearningcenter.com. We have a Catheta webinars tab, and there's a recorded webinar section, and you're able to access any of the webinar recordings that we've done for the past 2 years. So feel free to view those and share them with your friends and colleagues. Please also check out our upcoming events posted to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We even have a podcast titled Hope a Thing, a Native American Podcast, where we discuss more focused topics within tribal housing and self-determination. You can access that on Simplecast, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, as well as view the video recordings with our guests on YouTube. All right. Once again, I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to connect with you guys real soon. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording. Larry, you can go ahead and email me about that. I'm going to put my email into the chat. Here we go. And then remember, folks, if you did want a copy of any of the files that Vince referenced, as well as a copy of the slides, all that's available for your download right over in the file pods on the left-hand side of the screen.